The fight or flight response, particularly the adrenal producing fairly high concentrations of DMT when animals were placed under stress, is probably part of that process. If there is a chance of injury, you would want to protect, the most valuable organ, the brain. In that fight or flight response, a number of neurotransmitters go up tremendously, much like the near-death experience, where that same kind of phenomena has been observed. DMT has a role to play, in that process. It's not that we have hallucinogens naturally occurring in our brains to have a perpetual state of psychedelic experience. Although, for many centuries, philosophers speculated that it's all hallucination anyway. There's a lot of science that, in a manner, supports that concept. The process of perception of taking in external stimuli in the forms of different types of energy and processing that to produce knowable information that we use to do everything, that there had to be some regulatory system for that. And the only class of compounds that we know of that so dramatically and specifically affected perception were the hallucinogens. Our further study of that might help us understand when it all goes wrong, or how we might enhance it to make things go even better, than what we normally experience. In administering DMT, typically people experience rapidly moving geometric figures and fractals. If you're familiar with the artist M.C. Escher, one would think that he's probably had DMT before. Then they experience another reality, and sometimes that occurs through a tunnel or going into a bright light. You're in a separate reality, and some say things are more clear. In that place, they may interact with long-lost relatives, dead ones, with spirit guides and entities. What people report in near-death is the same kind of thing. They have this dissociative state where they may float above their body. Then they start going into this tunnel-like feature, into a bright light, then in another world, which most people associate with whatever their religious beliefs are. Heaven, nirvana, all of the different religions have basically the same definition of what happens. There was just a study where they were able to record people's brain activity as they were dying. It demonstrated that, one, the brain just doesn't turn off. It goes through a burst of activity in areas of the brain, particularly the frontal cortex and the dissociative and associative areas of the brain, where these experiences would be occurring. That happens with hallucinogen administration as well. There's almost exact overlay between imaging studies of what happens to the brain on administration of something like DMT and what happens in death, the process of death. In 1974, Dr. Samuel T. Christian, who was at the neuroscience program at UAB, he and his colleagues had shown that DMT had all the properties of a neurotransmitter. Right? It could be biosynthesized. The enzymes were identified. It could be taken up into vesicles and stored in the boutons of neurons. It could be released with a signal into the synapse. There were reuptake sites for it. And that it caused a signal to be sent. And there were changes in calcium, phosphate, ATP, and everything that you would expect for your transmitter. that work has been there for a very long time, but we would very seldom see it cited. Maybe because he did not publish in the best of journals. But the work had been done, and it was there. The work that we've been doing since that time is to try to make sure that the research field stays vigorous and then try to produce data that shows that these compounds are there, that they have an effect, and that the effects may be something we really need to examine. The binding of these compounds to internal 5-HT2A receptors and perhaps some others may be helpful in treating neurodegenerative diseases, Alzheimer's, dementia, brain damage that occurs from accidents and other stressors or events, that they may be a class of compounds we can now turn over to medicinal chemistry. There was a paper that showed if they took the dimethylethylamine side chain off of DMT and moved it around to the nitrogen part of the indole ring and made an iso-DMT, that compound still penetrates the membrane and has the plastogenic effects, but it's not hallucinogenic. So what does that say about the hallucinogenic process? Well, these compounds bind at the external HT and internal 5-HT. And what I proposed in a paper I've submitted for publication just recently is that the endogenous ligand for the hallucinogenic properties of these compounds is dimethyltryptamine. It is DMT. That's a normal neurotransmitter, and its receptor. It's the intracellular 5-HT. It produces this psychedelic effect through interaction with both the external and the internal, producing a increase in interconnections between different areas of the brain that are clearly shown on neuroimaging studies that activate areas of the brain that can be readily associated with the hallucinogenic experience. This is a endogenous hallucinogen neuronal system, which I proposed in 1981. We're finally getting some information that starts to put this story together. This is a very important system and pathway to understanding how the brain delivers to us our sense of reality, how we regulate perception, creativity, imagination, dream states, extraordinary states of consciousness. I had one recurring dream. I was laying in the bed, and I could see myself from a distance. I would come in close in my pajamas as a kid, about 12 years old. I would rise up and go out the window, up into the skies, right? And I would soar over the steel mills in Birmingham where I lived. I would see fantastic things beneath me, scenes of lush vegetation. But the whole time it was happening, I knew it was a dream. I would arrive to this hill, right, that was treeless, and there was a tall Victorian-style house sitting there. I would go in through the front door and start running this spiral staircase, and it would continue to spiral, and it was toward a bright light. I knew that in that light was the answer. Now, I didn't know what the question was, but I knew that if I could get there, I would have an answer. And I would wake up with this question, with this conclusion that I had reached in my own mind that I would never know. And that's what's driven me. We have been historically held back by people who believed that they had the answer. Science is the only field that you can't really believe in something unless it can be reproducibly proven. It's okay not to believe. It's okay to try to disprove what other people believe. Once you realize that you've made a mistake, you acknowledge that mistake and you move on with new information. That's the only way we are continuing the process of discovery and of knowledge, instead of stopping and saying, oh no, this explains it. This is where we are. No need to look further. I've always been against that kind of attitude. I never know when I've finished with a subject. The best kind of research generates more questions than it answers.